we get in, you're out of Kuwait, you see just every single aircraft in the world on the ramp, and you have this sobering feeling that things are going to be a little bit different. Where did the 2003 mission fall in that deployment? So you got there in March. Did you have some time under your belt beforehand, or where did this actually fall in your deployment window?
I had flown about 10 missions up to this point. Since I was a wingman, I wasn't even sure that they were going to take me on the deployment. And then I got there and I thought, well, maybe I'll just work in the mission planning cell. They may not let me fly. And then we needed every pilot we could get. We ended up bringing more pilots over. So I had flown about 10 missions as a wingman. We combat paired with another pilot. So as a wingman, I would fly with an experienced flight lead, which was fantastic. We'd fly with each other for about 2 weeks. So I had just switched over to a new combat pair. We had flown a couple missions together. But at this point, so our primary mission was to support the Army. And they were moving all the way to Baghdad and moving pretty quickly. And so by April 6th, 5th, 6th, 7th, in that time frame, we're in Baghdad now. And so now for us, this idea that we're doing close air support in downtown Baghdad was, when we first heard that, we were like, what? That's the super MES, missile engagement zone is what we called it. It's surrounded by surface to air missiles. Now, a lot of that was taken out by the time we got there, but we knew that this was going to be very different than Afghanistan for that reason. But that's where the ground troops were, so that's where we were going. And so it was quiet, may not be the right word. It was a little bit more quiet on the way to Baghdad. Like there wasn't as much resistance, we'll put it that way. And then we get to Baghdad, and now we're doing, close air support missions, troops in contact missions, every day. And so much so that they're just stacking these airplanes up around Baghdad so that if someone makes a call, someone can just float right in. So that's kind of the time frame where all this happened was, we're now in Baghdad, and things changed dramatically.
Did that feel surreal to you when you were flying in that stack on stack on stack of aircraft? Was there ever a time where you stood back and you were just, you felt like you were in some people describe it as a video game, or some people describe it as a dream. Did that ever feel surreal to you?
It does. I think it's surreal because it's like everything that you train for, right? It's all those things that you plan for, but to actually see it, for me, that happened on the April 7th mission. A lot of the times we were probably getting shot at. We just didn't know. And then, April 7th, all of a sudden, that mission, we ended up a lot lower than we normally are. So I could see a firefight. Like I could see the tracers. I could see the smoke. It was just surreal to me. And it's kind of a half second of realization of like, this is everything that we trained for. This is exactly what we planned for. There's this moment, or not hesitation, but the second of like, I don't want to mess this up. Like, this is it. Like, I got to do everything that I've trained to do. It's just this moment of, it's surreal, and then it has to pass, right? Because then you're like, focus, 100% focus on what I'm doing.
So here we are, we're in the fight. You get the call, there was another mission that you were going to go support. And then I believe the call was for troops in contact, and you got diverted, and you had to do exactly that. You had to go in with lives on the line and people calling for your help. Yeah. You're in. How did that go? Like, what was the first thing that happened where you realized like, this is a different one?
I think, the weather that day was terrible. So we could not actually see the ground. And for us then, you had to get below the weather. It was it was a requirement.
Right.
So we weren't really sure we were going to be able to do anything. And then, you get a call for troops in contact, and you're like, well, we're going to figure this out. And so my flight lead just found a hole in the clouds and dove down through. Then I'm like solo in a rack by myself above the clouds. And he's like, all right, Casey, you can come down below the weather too. And so I found a hole in the clouds and just, dove down through. And that's when I broke out. And it was like, wow, I'm a lot lower than we normally are because we're below the weather. And just to see it set up, it was right over the Tigris River. Our guys were on the west side of the river, and then enemy on the east side. Targets, in terms of like a deviation of the target for friendly and enemy. It doesn't get much better than that to have a river in
right,
between.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a very nice differentiating feature. Makes us feel a lot safer. We know exactly where the friendlies are and the enemy is. And, but I could see like these, I mean, there was just flashes and smoke. It was just, I mean, it was so surreal for that second. And then it's like, immediately we're talking about, you know, we're going to roll in with guns. We have to get, our target was underneath the bridge. So for us, that's forward firing. We got to either shoot rockets or gun to get underneath the bridge. My flight lead was immediate. He saw the target. He rolled in from north to south as I'm just coming down below the weather. And the JTAC said, not effective. It's got to come in from south to north just based on where the enemy was at. You know, so now there's only one way we can come in and really one way we can come out. So we're very predictable. So, and we're talking about this. So we decide we'll just do a couple passes and then climb up, kind of get our energy back, reassess things. So we each did 2 passes, a gun pass and a rocket pass. And then on my last pass, he's like, all right, after this pass, we're going to climb up and reassess things. I rolled in on that last pass. I remember kind of just fine tuning my aim point right underneath the bridge, hit the weapons release button, the pickle button, pulled off target, just, you know, trying to climb and get my energy back. I'm heavy, full of weight, full of weapons, and just felt this, you know, this huge explosion at the back of the airplane. I mean, there is no doubt in my mind. Like, I knew immediately what had happened. I'd equate it to like getting rear-ended in a car crash, like at high speed. It kind of threw me over. I remember seeing this bright red-orange fireball. And then I did kind of the instinctive thing. As the jet nosed over, I pulled back on our control stick and just nothing happened. This is like, oh, this is not good. It's kind of that second of reality of like, this could go really badly as I'm seeing Baghdad getting closer. I mean, I remember like this half second of looking at my ejection handles and thinking, this is not going to go well. You know, this is the last thing that I want to do. And so I reverted to my training. Like, it was this instant of like, you know, things slow down, I guess, in some ways. Like, I remember seeing all of these things, but at the same time, I'm reacting. You know, I've got to do something to survive. And so I go back to my training of analyze the situation, figure out what the hell's going wrong, and could see this like, we have this caution panel over on our right side, and it's like, there's so many lights on it. I'm trying to decipher what's most important.
Terrifying.
And I look at the top. Yeah. And we've got hydraulic lights that are for pressure and the reservoir levels, and they're all on for both sides of the airplane, left and right. And I look up at the hydraulic gauges just above, and they're completely at 0. So at this point, I have 2 options. I eject over the enemy. Not really a good option. Not one I'm going to take. Yeah. And then we have a backup system. And so thankfully I, you know, flip that switch, and it actually, the airplane starts flying again.
During this whole time, did you ever hear the words? We talked about it before. I believe the instructor was his last name Sweet, that had been the previous A-10 pilot who was actually a prisoner of war. Yeah.
That's a good question.
I hear those words in my head, and instructors and mentors of mine, and I have distinct memories of being deployed and having extremely terrible things. And I hear the instructor go, "Aaron, you've got to do this. You've got to do this. Here, you got to go here." Did you ever?
I heard his voice along with. I'd read the book Warthog, which talks about pilots in Desert Storm, and I knew those stories of pilots that had been hit. I think this moment right in itself was so dynamic and happened so fast. I don't remember like thinking through that. As soon as I flipped the switch and now I'm flying, and now I'm like, okay, now this, like, I don't know how long I'm going to be flying for. Like, this airplane could quit. And it was like, okay, just get out of Baghdad, get above the weather. And then if I have to eject, at least then my chances of survival and escape are higher. Then those voices start coming in, especially when my flight lead says, all right, Casey, you got to think about if you want to jump out of the airplane or get it back to friendly territory and land. And that's when all of those stories, all of those lessons start kind of flooding in of like, I remember this situation, the first pilot that tried landing in manual reversion. I remember the stories from other A-10 pilots of how they flew in manual reversion. And so I think that's why I'm so passionate about the importance of sharing stories and those lessons learned, those Friday nights in the bar, right? They're so important because in those critical moments, that's when you hear the voices. That's when, they're not there, obviously, over Baghdad, but their stories are, their experiences are. I remember them, and I think that's what helped me get back safely.
Well, and now you're in the fight. Most importantly, hey, you took that initial hit. Okay, now we're in manual reversion. Okay, great. But now we're in the fight and you're flying back. When did you put it together that the aircraft was so irreparably damaged? Was it on the flight back?
Yeah, I think, I couldn't see the damage. So we have mirrors up in our cockpit and I was like trying to angle them to see the damage in the back and I couldn't see anything. So my flight lead pulled up next to me to do a battle damage check, which is like that look over airplane. It's actually the picture back behind me is us on the way back. Kind of that battle damage check. And he said that I had hundreds of holes in the fuselage and tail section, and then the big hole in the fuselage, in the horizontal stabilizer, which is kind of the back tail section. So I knew it wasn't good. I mean, I had all sorts of emergency indications and cautions, and it was flying. That's about all I can say. It was flying. It was not flying well, but it was flying, and all I wanted to do was get out of Baghdad. Get out of Baghdad. That was like, okay, if I can get out of Baghdad and then I have to eject, at least it's more open space. And then it was like, okay, I'm out of Baghdad. Let's get to friendly territory. Let's make it back to Kuwait. And thankfully my, fuel tank stayed full. I had no problems with fuel. We were very heavy. We had all sorts of gas because we had just filled up when we got to Baghdad. So we overflew Talil Air Base, which at the time we had positioned aircraft in. And I think there was one fire truck. So that was our decision to overfly Talil, is if I crashed on landing, that one fire truck, no hospital, potentially not a great situation. So, these are the kinds of conversations we're having. Like, okay, well, if you crash, you probably want an ambulance and a fire truck, we're talking reality. Definitely makes you think about the worst case scenarios. And
absolutely. Well, life becomes binary. It's ones and zeros at that point. You're alive. You're in the fight. Am I flying? Yes or no? All right. Yep. Okay. Next problem. Yep. If I have to crash this bad boy, am I going to be able to walk away from it? Maybe not. Okay. Yes or no? Let's figure it out. Let's go. You get ready. What airbase did you end up landing at?
We ended up landing back in Kuwait. Back at our home base, which was, it's in friendly territory. So if I have to eject at the last second, I'm at least in Kuwait. There's rescue helicopters right there.
Right. You made the decision to land. You're getting on short final. You were flying yourself by wires and pulleys and straight up Wright Brothers stuff. And an aircraft that should be shot down. After providing close air support. Now, by the way, we glossed over it. You hit your target on that last run and you did neutralize that threat on your way out. What were you thinking as you were on short final and you were about to put this aircraft out? It was yard 06. Is that correct?
That was my call sign. Okay. I think at that point, it's just like a little bit of prayer that you make it out, that you do the right thing, that you don't mess it up. Honestly, I was also thinking about the pilots that had come before me. I knew about their experiences. There were 3 pilots that tried to land in manual reversion during Desert Storm. The first pilot was killed, crashed on landing, and I knew about that story. I knew what he had done and the lessons that we had learned from that. And so I was very cautious about having that in the back of my mind, knowing what I needed to do, which was to fly this power on landing, fly it all the way to the ground. And, I had those, I knew I wasn't going to have brakes. I wasn't going to have steering. I wasn't going to have my speed brakes to slow me down. I mean, it was all just a lot of things I didn't have. And so I remember the stories of the pilots that came before me and focused on just controlling the airplane, just keeping it steady. And then when those wheels hit the ground, relief is like this. I don't know. It's not the right word. It's the word I use because I was so relieved, but it was so much bigger than that. It was just like this. Okay, I'm going to live. That's really what it came down to, was this reality of like, okay, I made it. I'm going to live. I'm not going to die today. Today's not my day. And So yeah, intense relief. I don't know. And then I'm like, I hear this voice. I'm like, so in this moment of like, oh, thank God I'm on the ground. And then I hear this voice of like, hey, Casey, you can stop the airplane now. Cause I was just rolling slowly down the runway at this point. Like, at this point, I don't care. Like, I'm so
absolutely.
Slow. You're like, yeah, so long. And then the fire trucks are like, is she going to stop? You know,
they're like, Casey, they're like, tell you to pull over, pull over.
Yeah, pull over. And so I only had 5 brake applications. So it wasn't like I wanted to jam on the brakes right away. This was an emergency backup braking system. So I eventually used a couple of those pushed down on the brakes and got the airplane stopped. And then I was like, I want to get out. I want to see the damage.
Right. And what you got out, and you saw the aircraft, what did you feel?
Shock, I think, that it's dripping with hydraulic fluid. I mean, the airplane is just dripping with fluid. The backside of the airplane was black from a fire, like charred. There are holes everywhere. And I realized the holes aren't just in the back of the airplane. That's where most of them are. But there's holes up near the cockpit, around some of the fuel tanks. The engine took shrapnel damage. So it's a little bit more extensive, I think, than I originally thought. And I remember there were a bunch of Marines that were the firefighters there. And they're just like looking at the airplane, looking at me like with this, you just landed this thing, look. And I'm thinking the same thing, like, I just landed this thing. So.
Oh, how long did it take before you started talking shit to everybody? Was it immediate? I imagine it's immediate. Be like, not only did I land this, I'm one of the only, maybe a handful, 4 pilots that have ever tried it. I would have done it right away, but I think it's because I'm not as good a person as you, Casey.
I think I don't, what, for me, I was just so thankful that I was on the ground. I was it was just such a, I don't know, you're on this adrenaline high for so long. And it took me a while to come down from that. And I think it was just more of this thankfulness that I survived, that I got home. It was, I don't know, it was just to be around the guys in my squadron, like, I don't know, they're like my brothers, and so they were just so happy to see me. And I don't know, there wasn't a lot of shit talking. It was more just this, like, I think we were all just happy that I was back and I was on the ground safe.
I knew you were a better person than me. That's a great answer. So